we are going to have a really, again, fun time trying to keep this short. So let's just start by, let me introduce the phenomenal Joy Michaels.
Why, thank
Joy is an associate marriage and family therapist who wants to live at the intersection of faith and mental health. Joy believes in the power of healing the relationship to self and to others. So I love that. I know I say that every time I read that. The intersection of faith and mental health is beautiful.
Yeah, I feel like a special, especially to people of faith, because so often mental health gets criticized and whatever. So that's where I want to live. So thank you for that. And Brittany is an anti-burnout and social impact strategist. She is the owner of Be Renovo, a consulting firm dedicated to creating high-impact leadership teams and skilled nonprofit professionals who have fulfilling lives. And I love the who have fulfilling lives. Every time I read it, I just think, yes, it
Right.
doesn't have to be mediocre. It doesn't have to be less than just because we chose this hard work. It can be extremely fulfilling.
Right. It doesn't have to kill us.
Right. It doesn't have to kill us. It doesn't have to be this thing that we like white knuckle every day.
Yes, it's so true. So from the beginning, we want to acknowledge one thing from the beginning. We are two white women, and because of that, there are limits to this conversation. And we acknowledge that the majority of our university education and curriculum and research around this topic is centered around white voices, and therefore does not present this full picture of self-nourishment and mental health. So we do not personally battle racial fatigue or racial trauma. And when we advocate for socially just systems, like, we keep that in mind. So we have posted a list on Just Plant the Seed of BIPOC authors and researchers, meditation experts in the area of self-nourishment. We also have folks in Just Plant the Seed collective who are really, really passionate about this and really, really excited to engage this conversation from a BIPOC lens.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, Joy, how would you define self-nourishment?
Self-nourishment to me is being right aligned with myself, and then learning how to trust that inner person, knowing myself and nourishing myself well enough that there is an alignment and a right relatedness. Did that get it?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think I would add, for me personally, the journey has started in self-nourishment around really, really getting to know myself, becoming comfortable with myself, defining myself, and then trusting that inner voice, that inner intuition, that kind of like drives me, my decision making, the way that I process information, becoming aligned and trusting of this person.
Which is such a huge journey.
Yeah.
Just to be able to be in a place where you're like, I have done the work that it has taken to be able to get where I can trust my inner voice is huge.
Yeah. And I would probably venture to say that somebody listening to this right now might have a really bodily, visceral response, asking themselves if they trust themselves.
Yeah.
Or we might find that people say, I don't trust myself, I trust God. I don't trust myself, I trust God. And I personally identify as a follower of Christ. Some people listening to this might not. So I fully respect that idea. But I would also pose, do you know yourself? You know, do you know really, really intimately what you need.
Exactly. I think part of that is you weren't created in a vacuum.
Mhm.
You weren't created as somebody who doesn't, we can trust God fully,
Mhm.
but I'm probably going to learn how to trust his voice more in my life if I actually learn how to trust me
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
And I think that I think that even for multiple faiths, that might be the case. I'm not sure because I can't speak from that vantage point, but I know that many people who say, I trust in God, I don't have to, know me or trust me. Well, I think that your relationship with the person that you, or the being that you consider higher than you, might be diminished because you haven't fully explored the person that person that created you to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. That is exactly right. And we're just we're not just thinking beings, right? We're emotional, physical, spiritual, mental, like we are beings that all parts of us need to be in tune. So
Mhm.
I really love how you put that. Like we're not just made in a vacuum with one thing.
Yeah.
And we want to talk about three things today.
Mhm.
Um, the first one being de- defining this discomfort, right? We've already addressed a little bit of discomfort
Mhm.
around self-nourishment.
Yeah.
Then we want to talk about the impact of the absence of it,
Mhm.
and then kind of try to wrap it up about our own self-nourishment practices. So I think talking a little bit about self-nourishment and addressing the discomfort of it
Mhm.
starts with the fact that you and I did not want to call this self-care.
Yeah.
We we acknowledge that there is a discomfort around the term self-care. My personal discomfort and what I've heard from a lot of other social workers is that it puts the onus on the person to cure their own burnout,
Mm. Mm.
when the causes of burnout are both systemic, communal, and personal.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about self-care. Nobody's here to tell you to like take a bath and go play golf.
Please don't. Please don't. That's actually not going to do what you want it to do in the long run anyway. It might be a very temporary band-aid fix.
Right. What about you? What about like the term self-care?
I think what I have encountered in with clients is that when I talk to them and if the term self-care slips out, they
Right.
immediately have what you were talking about, like this very visceral reaction and like are like, oh, there you go again, talking about this thing. I don't have time. I don't have blah, blah, blah. I don't like so many reasons why. But I think the inner thing that's butting up against that word and this desire to do self nourishment is just this. We have um, these broken pieces within us that when I stop long enough to actually tend to them, it's hard to look at. And I've heard you say several times, people don't believe they're worth self nourishment. They don't believe that they're worth self care. And from what I have seen, it is because there are pieces of them that say they're not worth taking care of. They have experienced it from less than perfect parents, like none of us are perfect. And I wish that I was a perfect parent, especially because I'm sitting on that side of life and parenting these children. And I see my failure all the time and it breaks me. But then as a person who was raised by less than perfect people, there is grace then for me to be like, oh, well, not all of this is true. Not all of these wounds that I carry around and believe about myself that aren't true aren't necessarily things that I've done to myself. It's messaging that I've gotten from other people. It's messaging that I've gotten from culture. It's messaging that I've gotten from even broken systems that I now get to sort of, if I sit with it long enough and consider it, is that actually true? Is that actually what I want to be true of me? And that's where the real nourishing begins. But yeah, you have to get past that whole I'm not worthy, or even just the immediate like kind of reaction, you know?
Yeah. When you were sharing your story of why this matters, so we were on Instagram Live, and when you were sharing this story of why this mattered, was it a journey for you to become comfortable with self-care? Was it a like what or self-nourishment? Did you ever feel like you're not worth it, or maybe you feel guilty for pursuing it?
I think the trick is the guilt around pursuing it. And here's the thing about guilt. I think we feel guilty when we don't do it. You know what I mean? Like when we don't actually care for ourselves. If you think about people who always talk about, I need to lose weight, I need to lose weight, or I need to blah, blah, blah. There is guilt and shame around our language when we aren't taking care of ourselves.
Yeah,
And part of but then we use those same sort of guilt and shame to not do the thing that we really need to do.
right.
I don't have time. I wouldn't be spending enough time with my family. I wouldn't be spending, you know what I mean? Those sort of things. And so I think, like you mentioned last night, Joy, like I bet you deal with some guilt around doing exercise regularly. And I do, because
Yeah.
I know that like those 30 minutes, I could be sitting with my kids having a bowl of cereal and enjoying like another meal together as a family. And instead I choose to work out.
Yeah.
And I've had to deal with that on that side. But I also know that I'm a better person when
Yeah.
I've put in my 30 minutes. I'm much nicer.
Yeah.
You know?
Is it like grumpy mom? What do you want? Grumpy mom at breakfast or happy mom at breakfast?
Right. Or even just happy mom, period. You know
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, we don't even have to talk about breakfast, but you
Yeah.
either grumpy mom at breakfast who is malnourished in her spirit,
Mhm.
or you get really healthy mom,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe 75% of the time.
Yeah. And part of our work as like therapists is the root of the guilt, which is what you said, is identifying shame.
Mhm.
We have to help people identify their shame and their guilt around what is perceived as taking what they need.
Yeah.
And it is a really difficult thing to start. It's a difficult place to start.
Mhm.
And that's why I really applaud people for going to therapy, or leaders or people who just say, "You know what? It's time. I'm going to take a minute to stop and say like things need to change
Yeah.
here in my employment system or my personal system, in my marriage and my relationship with my kids. Like I'm going to address the shame and the guilt." And it can be a really hard thing to do culturally if you're brought up, you don't need therapy, or if there's a gender bias, like those who identify as women might feel that they're too guilty for leaving their family to go do something for themselves. Um,
Mhm.
and and I say that from stories, stories of women who feel chronically guilty for putting themselves first.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that we could probably talk about that for a long time,
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
Uh, so
And on the flip side, I feel like men, there is a sense of weakness that can't be shown if I take care of myself. I feel like that's there. Whereas women struggle with guilt and shame, I feel like men struggle with just shame around being weak and admitting that they might need more than what they're doing right now, or, that they actually might need help.
yeah, yeah, that's totally true. I think the guilt, um, the way that guilt hold us back from living a really full life is as people is really dangerous.
Yeah.
Uh, so we want to identify that, we really like if we're going to do the work, we want to identify when it creeps up.
Yeah.
But that is the number one reason why self-care makes people super uncomfortable, as opposed to just like go take a bath.
Yeah. That's easy. That's once. That's
Yeah.
whatever.
What I like when you were talking, what came up for me was we shame ourselves into doing the to-do list of self-care.
Mm.
And so like from a brain perspective, our brain can categorize information that is like, here is my to-do list of self-care today. I need to meditate. Okay, Brittany and Joy are telling me to meditate. They're telling me to work out. Oh my gosh, now I have to do this other take a bath thing. So we categorize it as another to-do list,
Yeah. Yeah.
as opposed to a ritual that our brains have identified. We need this for survival. We need this for our calm. We need this to get out of our fight or flight toxic stress system. And at the end of the session, we're going to talk about those things that have calmed us, as people who run a little anxious.
Ooh, girl. Do at least I do.
You know me. 6 is on the Enneagram.
Hey.
But we're going to talk about that, like the shift from a to-do list to a ritual that keeps you safe.
Yes.
It's a real big shift and it's a huge difference. So before we get into that, I want to talk about the workplace. And we are just going to try really hard to keep our time.
Doing a great job so far. Keep going.
Yeah. My watch died.
Oh no.
Like, can I charge my electronics before I do any of this?
That just wouldn't be our style.
No, it wouldn't.
It's what we do.
So my work right now is predominantly focused in nonprofits, consulting with nonprofits to make sure they are as healthy, their teams are as healthy as possible and as skilled as possible so that people can live, personally fulfilling lives. Yeah. And a couple things I want to talk about how leaders can contribute to this fierce anti-burnout culture, right? We're going to pursue this fiercely. This is a number one priority for us is we have to stop disaggregating our people. So they're not just employees, they're human beings.
Yes.
And we have these missions that are amazing. I know I've been working with a lot of very amazing mission-minded companies. And our mission to the community is a beautiful thing, but we also have to be mission-minded to our people because they are in our community. Our people are our community. So the first thing we have to stop and ask is like, for reflection, are we really mission-minded for our employees? And I love the people who have the courage to do that.
Yeah.
Because that comes with along with a lot of implications.
I was just thinking of a couple. Can you tell us like a couple of the implications that you feel like it comes with?
So I think that a lot of people think it comes with a financial obligation. If we change our systems to be really, really mission-minded for our people, we're already in a budget deficit, let's say. And I usually tell people when you do this work, you actually end up making more money in the long run because you're not dealing with high turnover. You have super high retention rates. And your clients are better served and they get the better outcomes that they need. You're serving people where you can then do the impact storytelling that you really, really want. And when you're able to do the impact storytelling, you're able to get more revenue to serve more people. And when you are serving more people, now you have the capacity to serve more people. Your team is strong enough to serve more people. So financial implications are a big one. Time. One thing I really think is important is we're really good at dealing like policies and procedures with crisis, but like post-crisis, what happens? Yeah. What is happening to our employees' nervous systems after maybe somebody had just had a very serious traumatic crisis? Yeah. What is going on? We want to know that as leaders. I want to know if my case manager, case age, peer support specialist is traumatized.
Yeah.
I want to know if they're burned out. I want to know if they're stuck. Not because they're employees that I need to perform, but because they're human beings
Mhm.
who are existing in a very emotional world.
Yeah.
And so getting the workplace right in social work is really important and it's worth the investment.
Yeah.
But the discomfort that comes with that is just the implications. And I would always I would show the research around that and talk a little bit about the courage. Like I applaud the courage for the people doing it.
Yeah.
So
I think that's incredible too, because I've just started by your recommendation as well. I just started reading The Advantage,
yes,
Patrick Lencioni.
yes.
And he's just not like, I just recently read the part about where most leaders think it's more important to be intelligent than to be healthy.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
the research shows that actually, if you're healthy and you're actually motivated in that direction, you see much more results and much more, retention, like you were talking about, just all those lovely, beautiful things that most leaders want. You want loyalty, you want, retention, you want a higher turnover in revenue, just those things. But
yeah, and people might not know this, but I've worked for this, but I've worked for Pat Lencioni's company for 4 years.
mm,
And um, our consultants really do take the approach of they take this approach of being so team minded and accountability minded and ideologically conflict minded that it's like new behaviors that penetrate an organization.
wow.
The organizations commit to these like new operating behaviors, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And that's why I started my own company for nonprofits, because when we do it, our clients experience better outcomes.
Yeah.
When a social worker behaves a certain way and a social work leader behaves a certain way, that family on the street is less likely to experience falling through the cracks.
Yeah.
And so it's so important. It's just so, so important to focus on smarts and health.
Yeah.
And there are companies like Netflix has come out and said, like, we don't do the brilliant jerk. We don't care if you're super smart. If you're not nice,
You
you're
don't be here.
you don't get to be here, because the impact on team performance is too great. It holds us back.
Mhm.
And I applaud the leaders right now who are saying we will no longer let bad behavior hold us back.
Amen. Yeah, that's so beautiful.
So let's talk about the impact of
Yeah.
this. Let's talk about what happens um
Mm.
when we don't tend to ourselves.
I think what I'd love for you to start with is, and maybe this isn't where you were headed, but maybe it's a good place to start, is like completing the stress cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
yeah, but
so in the book Burnout, um Emily Nagoski explains this really, really simply. So highly recommend you getting that book. So basically our bodies as primitive beings have a survival mechanism: fight, flight, freeze.
fun.
And yeah. And when we are always going, and in this field sometimes secondary traumatized, um we don't ever tell our bodies again that day or in that moment that we're safe.
Yeah.
So completing the stress cycle is doing an actual practice for your brain that tells your mind and your body that you're safe. You don't have to keep running from that scary lion.
Mhm.
uh and it is super important because sometimes you cannot remove the stressor, right? We talked about burning out in grad school. What were we just going to quit grad school? No.
Right. I remember my last summer semester before I started my clinical year. And there was such a pressure cooker happening. And I
Mhm.
just remember going to group therapy, like, because that's how we were practicing, and just sobbing.
Yeah.
in group therapy because I was close to burnout
Yeah.
in this place and I couldn't quit. I couldn't not finish. I was
Yeah.
almost done. You know?
Yeah. You can't remove certain stresses.
Yeah.
People sometimes can't just quit their job,
Right.
or life happens,
Yeah.
but we can day to day or moment by moment as we need to remind our bodies that we are safe.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means quieting ourselves in silence. And that's a hard thing to do when you are in pain or in grief.
Mhm.
And I do think that our culture has cultivated an avoidance of sitting with pain.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't love it.
Yeah. It's definitely not my favorite thing to do ever in the world.
I don't run to my meditation space to curl into a ball and cry. Oh, but it happens.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting that avoidance, I think we have created a culture in which it's so easy, even oftentimes, to think, right? I think that's the piece too, is we live in a culture in which so much numbing is available to us that we think we're avoiding the pain,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, I can't even, all the social media, all the streaming services, all of the alcohol, all of the medications that are available to us, all, just, and please don't hear that as don't take your anti-anxiety medicine or your antidepressant medicine. Like, I just mean as far as like street unhealthy behaviors around drugs and alcohol and any substance,
Right.
it's just like, why sit with my pain when I could just go
Numb it.
numb it? Yeah.
And that also is not coming from a place of judgment. I think you and I have probably both experienced at this stage of life a healthy level of numbing where you're like, okay, well, I either don't have the time
Right.
to sit with myself, or one thing you told me when we first started talking was like, my clients don't want to cry. Why? Why don't they want to cry?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Nobody wants to cry because they're afraid they won't stop.
Yes.
They are afraid that they will. A huge amount of sitting and looking at our pain has to do with coming to the end of ourselves. That's a phrase that your sister-in-law loves to say, Anna. She loves to say coming to the end of ourselves. But I think I think we're afraid that the crying will end up killing us,
Hmm.
that the pain will cause us death.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to consider what that means.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to have to sit with my mortality, and yet,
Yeah. Um, and I think that when we are too afraid to like get it out of our bodies and cry, it stays in there and it sneaks up on us some at other times.
yeah.
But I really want to add though that it's not safe for people to be in their body. It's
Mhm.
not safe for some people to close their eyes. It's not safe for people to be curled into a ball because they can have traumatic memories come back up, or their body's just not like a safe place. So everything that we're talking about is like, if there is a sense of I cannot do this, or this is kind of scaring me, go to a therapist.
Please, yes. I
Yeah,
was just gonna say that, like, please don't even try and deal
it's
with this
not
on
safe.
your own. If
Yeah,
it's not safe in your body, go find a safe place or a safe person where it can be safe, or where you can at least begin to offload a lot of it so that it can be then worked out and worked through, so that then at some point you can come home and you can find safety.
yeah, and we're kind of talking about that, the context of the impact of kind of not being in your body
Mhm.
and not telling yourself that you're safe and that you're okay, and that you're turning that like nervous system response off.
Yeah.
There is an impact to that, and one of those leads to burnout where you just can't give or do one more thing. And what we're saying is pay attention. you
Yeah.
know, because there's a myriad of reasons why people avoid feelings, negative, whatever, like if grief, there's a myriad of reasons why people choose to take a different direction.
Mhm.
Um, and we think that to have the long-term perspective of staying in this field, learning the psychological benefits of embodiment is really key. And it should be done within the context of a licensed professional.
Yes. Yes. Or at least a knowledge that you are safe. I think that's, if at some point it begins to feel not safe, call somebody, call a therapist, call somebody licensed. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So an impact of the avoidance of pain, but the positive aspects of addressing your pain, um, whether you do it with somebody or if you're skilled and are in meditation already, you will know what I'm about to say, which is the positives of uh of embodiment or sitting with yourself is that moment you realize it does not kill you
Yeah.
and it does not grip you. And that feeling of becoming a friend non-judgmentally
Mm.
to your emotions and your negative emotions, when you realize they're not there to hold you so tightly, um, brings a lot of joy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, even now, just as we talk about it, there's so much freedom that I feel within myself because that now I'm allowed to have the hope. I'm
Yeah,
allowed to have the joy of something different, a different alternative to then shoving down and numbing,
yeah,
I mean, and avoiding and not dealing with
yeah.
a different option.
Yes. And the shoving down, as far as secondary trauma goes, sometimes I had this job once many years ago, where we had 6 deaths in one summer of clients in a very vulnerable housing community. And I had to stuff it down while I watched somebody, you know, kind of die right in front of me. I had to stuff it down to work. That snuck back up on me, but it was compounded by so many deaths. And what
Mm.
I want to encourage people who are in this field is to say, get it out.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody about what you're hearing in therapy. Get these stories out and close the stress cycle. Um,
Yeah.
Otherwise, one of the consequences I experience is like this projection onto my children of like, we are not in a safe world,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely.
because social workers hear some really crazy things. And now, you know, we're not in a safe world.
Yeah.
And my kid is not safe. So we just have to be able to create those safe spaces to say, this is what I heard today.
Yeah.
And it's messing with me and kind of like get it out. So, how we do that, let's talk about our personal practices. We don't really have a lot of time. So, um, let's end the session, but let's end this like conversation with we'll tell you, we'll post this maybe on just plant the seed, the things that we do to
Mhm.
keep ourselves nourished and sustained as ritual as opposed to a to-do list. But Joy, you said something really important before we started this. Do you remember?
I don't know. Maybe. What did I say?
um it goes back to what we said from the very beginning, and we're going to give a menu of practices that we and others have found beneficial.
Why are they beneficial?
Why is it a menu?
Oh, because what I do and what Brittany does may not be what you need.
Right.
So I can tell you all day long what I do, but that's what works for me. And it shifts, it changes even for me, not necessarily uh big massive shifts, you know what I mean? But there are times when I know I need something new because this isn't hitting all the right levels yet. So I just have to then go back and go, okay, well, there's something else I need here. So that's why it's just because like while Brittany and I like we are hardcore self-nourishment, everything that we do may not be what you need. So we want a menu so that you can go, oh, let me try this, see if it works. If it doesn't work, okay, That's why I love the word practice. You know what I mean? Because it takes some time and some practices to really kind of clue in and figure it out.
Right. And you'll see from mine that meditation is a huge thing for me. I meditate 3 times a day. I'll post this, explain it. But I started meditating 5 minutes a day
Mhm.
many, many years ago. And it's like building a muscle, truly getting into that space. And it's hard. And so, whatever you do is a thing that you're doing to calm yourself and tell yourself that you are safe. And if you don't know what you need, that is the most amazing place to start,
Yeah.
right? I don't know what calms me down. I don't know what nourishes me. I don't know what closes my stress loop.
Yeah.
Those things are like places for journaling and exploration that are really just the start of like cracking yourself wide open and just being like ready, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I think that's beautiful.
yeah. I think that's it. So, we are going to post a couple of things just as a reminder. Posting this recording, if we save it not into the cloud, wherever the cloud is, it says that there's a cloud, but we're not going to save it there. We're going to figure out how to save it. And then we have a list of BIPOC authors, researchers, and meditators who are, amazing and leading the way in this movement. And then we will post little like menus of ideas that we and others are doing that you guys can look at. And then you can always message us
Yeah.
on Just Plant the Seed for more information if you have any other questions.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.